Now that I've made an Olympic team, one of the logical things for me to get better between now and LA was to race against world-class people. And I feel like Boston just takes such pride in bringing in such a world-class field every year. And it's a racer's race, right? Like this is all about racing. So I know that I'm going to be racing against people that are future Olympic medalists or past Olympic medalists and future world marathon major champions and past world marathon major champions. It really just checks every box. I know if I can be successful in Boston, I can be successful anywhere.
Welcome back to the Shakeout Podcast for a special Boston Marathon edition of The Rundown. I'm your host, John Gay. On this episode, I sit down with 3 Canadians with ties to Boston to discuss their unique perspectives on the most famous marathon in the world. First up, we'll hear from 2024 Olympian and Canada's second fastest marathoner of all time, Rory Linkletter, who joins the show to discuss his return to the starting line of the Boston Marathon for a shot at redemption after a tumultuous debut there in 2021. Later, I'm joined by 2 other Canadians with ties to the world's longest-standing marathon event. Paula Roberts-Banks is a 12-time Boston Marathon qualifier. Despite clocking a qualifying time for the 2025 event, Paula has made the decision not to make the trip to Boston this year, amidst geopolitical tension between Canada and our neighbors to the south. After that, 23-year-old University of Western Ontario dentistry student Kristian Jamieson joins me to discuss preparations for his very first trip to the starting line in Boston, where he'll be following in the footsteps of his great-great-grandfather, Tom Longboat, who became the first Indigenous man and Canadian to win the Boston Marathon all the way back in 1907. With Marathon Monday fast approaching and the sporting world turning its eyes towards Boston, join me to hear diverse viewpoints from Canadians and get the rundown on what makes this marathon so iconic. In 2021, at his Boston Marathon debut, Rory Linkletter crossed the finish line on Boylston Street in 2 hours, 23 minutes, and 34 seconds, finishing a distant 33rd overall in a time that remains the slowest mark of his 6-year professional marathoning career. Now, riding the momentum of a marathon build that has already witnessed new personal bests at 10,000 meters in the half, Rory heads to the starting line in Boston with an eye on redemption. Rory, so great to have you back on the Shakeout Podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. My first rendition of the John Gay version of the Shakeout podcast. So excited to have familiar listeners, but with a new host.
Oh, well, we are so excited to have you back, and I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. I think I landed the job on the Shakeout Podcast because of my proximity to the great Rory Linkletter, especially after recent accomplishments in the last year. Since we've last spoken, it's been about a year, or since you've last spoken to our audience, I should say. We speak all the time. But in the last year, you've had a heck of a run. Personal bests at every single distance, a great qualifier for the Olympic marathon, half marathon PB, 10,000 meter PB. You've even thrown some track races in there. How's the last year gone?
Yeah, I think it's been a big learning experience of a year. Obviously, with every high comes usually a couple lows in this sport. And I think I learned a lot from qualifying for my first Olympic Games and competing in my first Olympic Games. And I left the quad, or the cycle as we call it, feeling like the next one's the best one, and I'm looking at it with fresh eyes and excited and very motivated in just the year after the Olympic Games.
Totally. For I think a lot of athletes, ticking that Olympic box, and it's not an easy box to tick, and it sounds almost too reductive to say that it's a box ticked, but has your perspective shifted at all now that you can call yourself an Olympian? You've been there, done that, got the tattoo. Does that shift your perspective at all as you look ahead? Yes, there's still another quad building towards LA, but has the day-to-day or the year-to-year changed at all now that you can call yourself an Olympian?
I mean, obviously, it adds some merit and some validation to the selfish pursuit that this sport can be at times. But I think more than anything, I left Paris feeling like, okay, that was cool. But it was also a little underwhelming with how I felt after the race and how I felt about my performance. So I feel like even though I ticked the box, I'm very proud to call myself a Canadian Olympic marathoner. And I'm very excited about the prospect of making LA my real defining moment as an Olympian and not having Paris be my only experience. So very motivated by it. And yeah, I left the closing ceremonies in Paris just being like, man, This was great. I'm really glad I was here, but man, I want to be back and do bigger things.
Yeah. And pretty cool that the next ones are within driving distance of home. I think it's a pretty special opportunity in front of every Canadian to have a North American Olympic Games coming up. As part of that shift, you are working with a new coach in the last year. This will be your first marathon season, full marathon season, working with John Green. Take us a little bit into the shift in coaching for some of our listeners who maybe haven't been keeping as close of tabs in the last 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, so my career took off when I started working with Ryan Hall in 2022, I believe it was when we started. And I had what I considered the year of my career in 2022. I had a solid year in 2023. I had, a career year in 2024 under Ryan. And then after the Olympic Games, he decided to step away from coaching elite athletes and just be more of like a person for once in his life after being an athlete for so many years himself and a coach immediately following. And I had already set out roots here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and wanted to see if there was a possibility to find a coach that was located here so I could keep this place that I now call home a part of my life. And John Green was the first name that came to my mind because of just a few really positive interactions over the years with him as a person and knowing a thing or two about how he approaches his coaching. So I had to sit down with him, went really well. We decided to work together through the New York City Marathon. That was a really positive stepping stone race for me. It was my first major in a few years, and I felt like it was a really solid day in such a short build with John. And I was like, okay, I can see how this could really work long term. We, committed to going through this year, really trying to take some risks and be the best versions of ourselves this year. And the Boston build, when we mapped it out, I was really excited because it was full of new unknowns and big swings in training. And I was excited for what could be. And I feel like it's been my favorite marathon block to date. Just, going into the race without knowing what the outcome's going to be, I feel so good about the work I've done, the memories I've made, and the people I've shared the miles with.
Yeah, it has been, I think, by whatever metric you want to use to measure a marathon build, an incredibly successful run of the last several months. What have some of the big differences been from this build to previous builds, whether that's just the feel of it, whether that's specific sessions or volume? Could be a whole bunch of different factors, but what's made this such a unique build that's contributed to it being so positive?
Yeah, I think three things come to mind immediately when you ask that question. Number one is kind of having a full cycle of doing double threshold for the first time in my career. I did a little bit before New York, but I hadn't really been able to have the full cycle full of that. And now that that's become a staple in my training, I feel like I've seen some of the reasons why that might be such a craze in the running world. And it's been a fun component to add to my training and something I really enjoy doing. It's one of my favorite days is when we have double T days. Uh, so that's one. Number two is the highest volume build of my career, by quite a large margin. I mean, it's I've been running competitively and doing marathons now for 6 years, and I think the average mileage per week is going to be somewhere around 25 to 30 kilometers a week higher than I've ever done before. Just in consistency, not a lot of low weeks, lots of consistent high weeks. Peaking out at about 210 kilometers in a week was the highest week I had of this build, but I did, multiple weeks back to back to back of 200 plus. And that was something I had never done before. So I felt that that was a huge benefit. So that's number two. And then number three is like, I kind of alluded to it, that just like the people I've shared the journey with, John's group is a little bit better than any group I've been in prior about ingratiating out of towners and people from other groups. And I've got some new training partners like you, John, that have been a part of this journey. Uh, Aaron Benenfeld, German guy that's been training with us as part of our team. And then like the coming through town people like Andrew Alexander, Johannes Machman, and other in town people that have mixed in here and there, Bia Simbasa and Jacob Thompson. I feel like I've just had such a great community to share the miles with, and obviously the ladies on our team as well that share a lot of those fun moments, rides down to Camp Verde and such. It's just been full of just really great personal experiences and connections with others.
Yeah, you've really been able to tap into the best that Flagstaff has to offer. I think it's one of the coolest things about a city like this. It's certainly what brought me down here for much of the year is that everywhere you turn, there's incredible athletes, very motivated athletes, and it's been great to see you work in with so many different people. Um, a- as a point of personal comparison, like it gives me a lot of joy to know that I was in some small way a part of your Boston build, and I know that there's other people that have shared parts of this build and are rooting for you as well. In addition to everything that you just listed, I think it's also worth mentioning that within the context of the build towards Boston 2025, you've been hitting them out of the park every time you've stepped on a starting line in 2025 in the lead up. Half marathon PB in Morigame, first time under 61 minutes. And then a month and a half later, you follow that up with first time under 28 minutes in the 10,000 meter. So you're showing range across a bunch of different distances. Is that something that is new in your training? Is that something that you've done historically as you've prepped for a longer race like the marathon, is incorporate those shorter events?
Yeah, I think the 10K was kind of unique in the sense that I've never raced a race under half marathon in the middle to late stages of a build. I've kicked off a lot of builds with 10Ks and even shorter road races, like I did the Manchester road race at the beginning of my Seville build. I did the mile indoor track race at the very beginning of my Seville build, just over a year ago now. And I think that that's something that gives me a lot of confidence is the ability to spin the legs and run under distance and do it well. But yeah, this was a little different in the sense that I did it right in the heart of the build, and we kind of in pencil wrote the 10 as a race we might do, and it was going to come down to, was my body ready to race at 10? Was I fit enough to run sub 28 minutes? And did we feel like the race offered more than just another big long marathon session? And I think we answered all those questions as yeses as we got closer. So, um, yeah, it made just a lot of sense, and it did increase my confidence going into Boston because a lot of guys can run sub 28, but I don't know if there's more than a dozen on the start line that will have that tool at their disposal on race day.
Yeah, and speaking of that start line, it's a perfect segue into talking about what is, in at least recent history, one of the very best Boston Marathon fields ever assembled by a descending order list. And obviously, that doesn't tell the whole story, but you go in ranked 18th with a 2:08:01 PB, which, I mean, it's the second fastest time in Canadian history. It's ridiculously quick, and yet there's 17 guys who have an argument to be made for why they should beat you on race day. What's it like towing the line against such a deep field, and how is that factored into your preparation?
Yeah, I mean, now that I've made an Olympic team, one of the logical things for me to get better between now and LA was to race against world class people. And Boston, almost every year, I would say, is one of the highest esteemed majors of the majors. So there's six majors, soon to be seven with Sydney this year. But like, not all majors are created equal, right? Like there's different levels of prestige, there's different like amounts of budgets that these races are putting into the elite fields, and I feel like Boston just takes such pride in bringing in such a world-class field every year. It's a racer's race, right? Like it's not Berlin or Tokyo or London where people go there, they may race it, but it's also about time, right? Like this is all about racing. So I really like it, and I really like that I know that I'm going to be racing against people that are, future Olympic medalists or past Olympic medalists and future world marathon major champions and past world marathon major champions. It really just checks every box. And, you know, I know if I can be successful in Boston, I can be successful anywhere. And so the way I approach it, sitting at number 18 on the descending order list is, well, I need to get a little bit better if I want to reach my goals, which I've been pretty vocal is like I just really want to crack a top 10 at one of these world marathon majors, and that's getting harder and harder to do. I feel like these fields get better and better year after year, but I think it's something I can do, and I think it's something that you just got to take as many swings at it as you can until you're doing it regularly, and then once you get into that next level, then you can aim your sights higher and think bigger, and hopefully have podiums and top fives in your future.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about Boston being really a racer's race. No pacemakers. The course is famously hilly, also unpredictable depending on if it's a headwind or a tailwind year. There's been freezing cold, raining years, super hot, muggy years. How much does that factor into your strategy going in? Do you consider yourself to be a racer in the sense that these challenging conditions, the lack of the consistency of pacemaking, play into your strengths, or is that something that's more of a liability for you?
Well, historically, I don't have a reason to believe that it should be a strength, but deep down, I do think so. Like, my best marathons to date are actually probably the ones that are, well, I mean, my best one is a time trial race, right? Like Seville. But I would argue that like Budapest and Eugene were two of my other best ones, and those were championship races with adverse conditions and unpredictability and pacing and this, that, or the other, right? So I guess I kind of have a little bit of experience on both sides. I haven't quite proven what I think I know to be true, that like Boston, New York, those types of races, the Olympic Games are the perfect grounds for an athlete like myself. But I do believe that deep to my core, and I look to prove that to myself more than anyone else on Marathon Monday, Patriots Day, just because it's something that I've deep down like I identify as someone who's a racer first and foremost.
More so than a time trialer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, courses like this are probably the best preparation for those major championships like a world championship or an Olympic Games where the gloves come off, there's no pacing, it's every man for himself. Going out there on Marathon Monday, are there particular guys in the field or particular storylines that you're most excited to put yourself in the middle of or pit yourself against?
Yeah, I mean, I've been again, this is something I've been pretty vocal about. I like to measure myself up against my North American peers more than anything. I take great pride in where I stand in the lore of Canadian marathoning history. So I'll be looking to, you know, run a time on a course like Boston that maybe no other Canadians ever run. I will be looking to compete with the top Americans who I race most regularly and I have relationships with. Those are the things that get me really competitive and excited. A thing like Boston also is like, how many, world beaters can you take down? Like, is there going to be a guy like Mukhtar Idris who's medaled on the track that he's debuting in Boston this year? Is that a guy that I could get? Is there is Evans Chebet gonna have a chink in his armor that I can take advantage of? Like there's so many fun things that like could be dangling carrots as you rip down Heartbreak Hill and you have your eyes set up on the road on Commonwealth Ave, and you can see for a mile the Sit Go sign is ahead of you, and you can see when people are dying in front of you, and that's something that I think will kind of, as it unfolds in front of me, be the biggest motivator possible. Is I plan on racing for top 10, racing in a way that puts me in a position to secure a top 10 finish. And I don't know what that means yet. That could mean going out faster than I've ever gone out before. That could mean closing faster than I've ever closed before. It could mean just taking a lot of big risks at weird times. And that unknown is almost as exciting as anything else. Is just like, we don't know. It's gonna be fun.
Do you think you mentioned guys making their debut who have this pedigree on the track or at shorter distances? How much do you think the now 6+ years of marathoning experience that you bring in helps level the playing field in a race like this, particularly one where anything can happen? I mean, Boston has such a wide range of winning times or conditions on race day. Do you think that those years of experience give you a leg up against guys who maybe at face value based on personal bests at shorter distances are in a league of their own, but come Marathon Monday, are all bets kind of off?
I think to some extent. I think there's certain athletes that I look at on the start line and I go, if they have their best day and I have my best day, they're probably finishing higher than me just because of pure class. And I think I just have to take steps in the right direction for that. But I do know that people are going to make mistakes. Like people make mistakes all the time in marathons. And I feel like Boston and New York and the Olympics are places where people make mistakes more often than other courses. It's not as cut and dry. There's not someone holding your hand and telling you this is the pace that the lead group's going out in. Have fun, and I think that's what's exciting is that my experience allows me to make really tough decisions that I can lean on past experiences to inform those decisions and hopefully combine my improvement in fitness with my not so newness to the event, and the fact that I've done Boston before and the fact that I've done 10 other marathons total. I think that's a huge advantage on race day.
You talk about people making mistakes, especially when the stakes are so high, like at a Boston Marathon. Your previous experience with Boston itself didn't go the way you had hoped. What have you learned from that experience that you're bringing into this race? And what are some of the tips specific to Boston that maybe you can share with our listeners? I know many of them are probably listening to this as they make their way to Boston. What is it about this course that makes it so tough to get right? And how are you prepping for that in 2025?
Yeah, I think, I could look back on Boston in 2021 when I did it, and I could find 5, 6, 7 reasons why that was the worst day of my marathoning career to date. And I couldn't pinpoint which one was actually the culprit, but I could definitely find a few things that went wrong. Um, Number one, just like it was my first major, it was my third marathon ever. And I feel like I got really caught up in the excitement and the hoopla that is the Boston Marathon. And I think that experience will be the case for everyone on the start line, not just the pros.
Yeah.
Uh, I think anybody in that race will have an opportunity to get really sucked in by the aura that is Boston Marathon weekend. In it's unlike anything else. Now that I've done New York and I've been to Chicago twice to pace. Boston's kind of in a league of its own with how much excitement goes into the event. New York is definitely right up there. The Olympic Games even feel like they pale in comparison to like the general person's experience and excitement going into Boston. Anyways, there's just a lot of energy that can easily detract from the race. And I think you should not ignore that energy, not avoid it, but just be aware of it, acknowledge it, and do your best to still kind of do what you would normally do and be as present as you can. I think soaking it up and enjoying it is something that I will try to do to the best of my ability while still, keeping a lid on things early. I think most famously, people make mistakes in the first 13 miles, first half of the race at Boston, just because there's really nothing to slow you down until mile 15, 25K in, and you can really not be aware of the damage you're doing to yourself. And I remember for me, I hit the Newton Hills and the first uphill happened, and I was like, whoa, I've already lost whatever momentum I had, and I'm only going to get slower from here on in. And it just got harder and harder and compounded. So I think mentally, the way I break down the race is really three sections now. Is the first half slash through Wellesley, and then the Newton Hills is its own major part of the race. And to me, I'm going to basically put all my effort into surviving Newton and staying on course, as in like within my group, within myself, in the race that I want to be in, and just stay super relaxed through that. And then if everything goes well, I plan on racing so hard down the backside of Heartbreak Hill and through those last 6, 7K of the race, just going absolutely to the well and closing, because there's really nothing to slow you down if you can make it through Heartbreak Hill with your legs still on your torso, attached to your torso.
Body.
Yeah.
Yeah, great advice. And like you say, applicable no matter what level you're coming into Boston at. Anybody who's there obviously has some experience at the distance just by virtue of having their BQ. But Boston is like nothing else in the marathoning world. It is really the great granddaddy of them all. And Rory, we're so appreciative that you've been willing to take the time to share your wisdom with it. Wishing you all the best in these final days of tapering and freshening up for the event. And yeah, from my perspective, for all of our listeners tuning in, this man is very fit and he will absolutely be one to watch come Marathon Monday. So look for Rory Linkletter to be leading the charge for the Canadian contingent down Boylston on Patriots Day. Rory, thanks so much and best of luck this year at Boston.
Thank you. And appreciate all your support in the journey. And yeah, I'm honored to be a third-time guest on the Shakeout.
Yeah, we look forward to the fourth time already. My next guest is Rosso, Ontario's Paula Roberts-Banks. In addition to her work as an artist, writer, and photographer, Paula is also an avid marathoner. having raced the distance 30 times, including 12 appearances on the start line at Boston, dating back to 2008. Paula shares her reasons for electing to forego the event this year, as well as her experience with a marathoning community that transcends borders. Paula, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me.
You have such a compelling history with Boston, and I'd love to start there with that. Take us back to your first Boston Marathon.
Well, it was in 2008, and I had just I'd run a couple of around the bays before that, and I wanted to up the distance, and I ran Mississauga in 2007, and realized that I had a BQ there. And so I decided I met my husband at the finish line, and I said, we're going to Boston next year. And that was kind of it. It was as random as that. Back in 2008, and I think even up to 2009, 2010, you could actually register for Boston on marathon weekend.
Wow.
I guess changed a lot. But I mean, that said, I registered as soon as I could, and we made plans, and we went down there. And in the process of getting ready for Boston, of course, the first time you run it is so exciting and nerve-wracking, and especially because I was a fairly new marathoner at the time. And I joined a couple of forums online and kind of lurked in the background. They were specific to the Boston Marathon, and ended up becoming quite good. We called ourselves imaginary friends because it was all online. And so I became very good imaginary friends with quite a number of people. And they were all running Boston as well. And a lot of them were running it for the first time. And so it became a network of friendship as well as a race.
Wow. And is that what really kept you coming back? Fast forward to present day, you've run Boston 12 times. You've qualified even more times than that. How important was that community of, as you call them, imaginary friends in keeping you making the trip down to Massachusetts every year?
Oh, it was very important. This was back, as I said, in 2008. So Facebook really wasn't, mainstream then. Mm-hmm. So a lot of your communication online was still on the online forums. And there would be like daily threads, like this is the training I did today and whatnot. And there was a core group of about, I would say, 30 people who would be posting every day. And you wouldn't just post about your run, you'd post about your life, you'd post about all sorts of things. And it was a friendship that developed. And most of these people were from the States, and really the only opportunity to see one another was on Boston Marathon weekend. So it became, as special as Boston is, you can't dispute that. It became a lot about seeing people and sharing the experience with them, people that you wouldn't see every day, for sure.
Yeah, in so many ways, it feels like a microcosm of the experience so many Canadians are going through right now, where they have shared community that doesn't see the border, that transcends the border. Talk about all of those connections that you made through the medium of running, but that were much bigger than that, and that Boston became the opportunity to connect in person, to connect in one place, but with this rich history that transcended the borders going into that. How much did that weigh into your decision? You've elected not to compete at the Boston Marathon this year. How difficult was it to come to that decision, knowing that there were so many touch points of community who will be at the event on the other side of the border this year?
Well, of course, the dynamic has changed, and the group of friends has changed as well. And so I think there's maybe 5 or 6 of us who were still continuing to run every year. So it wasn't such a large group anymore, even though we did maintain contact via social media still. So that kind of made the decision a little bit easier because there weren't so many of the people that I used to see back in the early years, let's call it. But I don't know about whether I actually had a moment where I decided that I wasn't going to run. It was just it was a gut feeling that just kind of blossomed. And I knew that in November when the election happened and the outcome of the election, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for Boston for me. I'd already registered in September because, of course, you have to. I kind of knew that I didn't want to run Boston anymore, and I just thought, well, I'll pivot to something else. I enjoy running a spring marathon, and there's plenty other ones to choose from. They're not the same as Boston, but sometimes being not the same as Boston is a good thing. I've been running the Georgina Spring Fling and the Georgina Fall Marathon quite a bit. They're very local to me, and I'm really enjoying those. It's so much different than Boston. It's so much. It's just a much smaller race. It's much more intimate. It's friendly.
In a lot of ways, seems like the hallmarks of Canadianness, again, in that microcosm of running. Smaller size, more friendly. How important do you think it is right now for Canadians to be reconsidering their relationship with the United States and maybe opting for those options closer to home, particularly for runners like ourselves?
Well, I think it's very much an individual decision. I came to my own decision because that's what sat right with me, but circumstances are different for everybody. And in the article that I wrote, I mean, the counterpoint that I used was my friend Jim, for whom it is his very first Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if it had been my very first Boston, I might have a very different decision process, because there's nothing like that. There's nothing like running your first Boston. There's nothing like qualifying for it. And I mean, I would counsel him to do it. You just have to kind of find the balance that's right for you. And he's not without qualms or hesitations either. I mean, he feels a bit guilty, I suppose, but he knows it's important for him, and he's worked really hard to get there. And I'll be following him virtually when he's running on Patriots Day and cheering him on that way. So, I mean, I think that you have to do what you feel is right.
Yeah. You mentioned that it is such an intensely personal decision for any Canadian, and this is not just limited to running a marathon in the United States, but really traveling for any reason. It is a personal decision. For those who are making the trip down to Boston, is there a role, in your opinion, that they should be playing as ambassadors for our country? Is there an added pressure or an added expectation on Canadians who are choosing to go south of the border?
I think that the most important thing is just to be yourself and to be proud of who you are and where you're from. I would be very, very surprised if any Canadian got any kind of poor reception in Boston. Marathon weekend, they roll out the red carpet for the runners. You are their hero. They are so kind. They are so enthusiastic about their race. And I couldn't see anybody having any kind of problem with being in Boston. But that said, I mean, you have to also represent yourself well, and don't go picking fights and getting political and whatnot. It's not something that I would want to do if I was down there right now.
Mm-hmm. Like you say, the sport, Bostonians are there to support marathoners, full stop. Doesn't matter where they come from, they're coming from
Yes.
all over the world. And there is something beautiful about sport as this international language. Paula, what would you like to see transpire between Canada and the United States in order to consider a future return to the Boston Marathon?
Oh, that's a big ask. I don't know if anything can transpire at this point. I'm really kind of pessimistic about the whole situation. There's just a whole lot of hate right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how that can be fixed. The hate, the polarization, they just seem to be stuck in a rut there, and I just, it's not somewhere I really want to be. I was there at Boston at the marathon in 2013 when the bombings happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was well away from the finish line when all of this went down.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to our room, and the door was locked. And I went and got the innkeeper, and she let me in. And then I saw, like, the TV was on, and I saw the finish line of the marathon with all the smoke and everything. And my husband had been following the marathon on TV and had seen what had happened, and he'd freaked out, and he'd gone running looking for me. And there was no cell phone service, so we couldn't get in touch with one another. So it was a pretty scary time. We were planning on traveling up through Maine the following week to do our little vacation. And people were incredibly nice for that entire 4 or 5 days that we were traveling through Maine. I had my Boston Marathon jacket on, and people were, expressing sympathy, and they were curious about what had happened. And we were heading up towards Quebec City through northern Maine. And we were maybe a mile from the border, and we got stopped by Border Patrol.
Wow.
And they asked, where were we going? Where had we been? And as soon as we said Boston, because this suspect was still on the loose, I guess, they took our passports.
Wow.
And went away for about 20 minutes. And they searched the back of the car. And I mean, we were a mile from the Canadian border, and I never felt further away from home than that. It was almost as bad a feeling as the bombings themselves.
Wow.
And I really don't think the Boston Marathon has been the same since. If you had run it before 2013, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. There was kind of a loss of innocence there. It's always kind of stuck with me, but to me that was kind of a taste of America that I really, really didn't like. And it's something that I think in our country we're not familiar with. You're not in Canada anymore. It's the same, but it's different. And you think you've got that awareness whenever you travel in the States. I always kind of worry, and that's not something that I do when I'm in Canada. So I don't know. It's just there's all that comes into it as well.
Yeah, so many layers to it. It is, I think, now more so than ever, the differences between our two countries, as congenial as the relationship has been for hundreds of years, the differences are starting to show. And I can absolutely agree. Many Canadians can agree with you that there is something different. It isn't home. There's something distinctly Canadian about our experience that isn't 100% the same once you cross that border. Paula, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience, and we wish you all the best of luck with your upcoming racing plans this spring. May 18th, you're running in Nova Scotia, I believe, correct?
Yes.
And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show and share from your years of experience as a runner, as a Boston Marathon qualifier, and as a Canadian as well. We are so appreciative of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'm joined now by Kristian Jamieson, a 23-year-old student at Western's Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry. Last spring, in just his second ever attempt at the distance, Kristian won the Niagara Ultras Marathon in 2:52:55, a time that earned him a qualifier for the 2025 Boston Marathon. Growing up on the Six Nations Reserve in southern Ontario, Kristian is the great-great-grandson of Olympian and marathoning great Tom Longboat, who became the first Indigenous man to win the Boston Marathon in 1907 in a time of 2:24:24. Kristian joins the show today to discuss his preparation for Boston, as well as the role that running has played in his journey of personal growth. Kristian, welcome to the Shakeout Podcast.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you and to reach out to your audience. So it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, well, we are so excited to have you on. At the time that we're recording this, we are T-minus 2 weeks till race day in Boston. How are the legs feeling as you start to come into your taper?
That's right. You know, the hay is in the barn, as they say. And so now it's just rest up, get the legs feeling, nice and quick and snappy. And yeah, no, the legs are feeling good. And I just can't wait to go out there, conquer those hills. Been doing a lot of hill training this season, so it's going to be a good time in Boston.
Yeah, absolutely. You have set up my next question perfectly. I wanted to ask if you've been doing anything specific. I know our listeners are keenly aware of those Newton Hills on the Boston course. You ran your qualifying time on a famously hilly course in Niagara. Have you changed training up at all, or is it a bit of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach?
So Boston, it's a unique course in the sense that the elevation gain, I believe it's 800 feet or so of elevation. So there's a lot more hills than there are in most marathon courses. So definitely during this block, me and my coach have put emphasis on doing hill training. And so, once a week or so, I really try to, get sprints on hills done. And as much as I can, even in my long runs, if it's not a scheduled hill training day, I try to run somewhere that has at least, one big hill to try to get that stimulus. And then around the bay, the oldest road race in Ontario, ran that last week. That was a very hilly course. And so that was another, training run for Boston to be able to tackle those hills, and hopefully Heartbreak Hill won't break my heart.
The hope of every Boston Marathon qualifier. Now, in addition to training for Boston, which for some people is in fact a full-time job. You're also in the thick of things with school right now. Take us through what you're doing right now education-wise, because you've got a very full plate.
Yeah, that's right. So right now I'm in my second year of dental school at the University of Western Ontario. And so I'm trying to juggle the running and trying to juggle the busy life of a dental student. It's been no easy task, but as they say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And for me, it totally is. I wouldn't want to change it for the world. It's awesome being able to, be a runner, set myself apart by also being a dental student. So, it's just, two different, unique worlds. One is an athletic world and one is an academic world that I kind of get to, live every day. And it does come with its challenges, but it's been such a cool journey so far.
How have you managed to balance the rigors of full-time dentistry with the rigors of Boston training? What's a day in the life look like for you right now?
So typically the running is very early in the morning. So normally I'll get up at 4 to 4:25 a.m. And this has been coming back since my undergrad days. So before dental school, I used to get up around 4:30 or so, and I used to study. But now how it goes is get up 4:25, try to be on the road running for 5 o'clock. So one of the unfortunate things is you don't have much time to do a proper warm up. So as soon as that alarm goes off, out of bed, get changed, do 5, 10 minute warm up, do the best that you can, and then, go hit the roads. And, some days you're gonna go do a 20K before class. Some days it's, a hard, VO2, track session or a hill session, and then come back home, and then pretty much get ready for the day. Some days are more hectic than others. Some days I'm at school from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Some days I'm only at school for a few hours, and so I have a little bit more time to kind of, get a proper warm up in before my run, a proper cool down. But typically it's just run in the morning, school, and then evenings, those are designated for workouts. So like strength training, any mobility work that needs to be done, elastic band work, going over, different film, learning things from, more experienced runners, kind of doing my own research, speaking with my coach about upcoming runs and stuff like that. So there's never a dull moment in my life. So
Yeah, no
that's I'm
kidding.
somehow I'm managing.
Yeah, holding it all together. I think you have a distinct advantage over many of your competitors come race day in that the gun time at Boston is going to feel like a sleep in for you. If you're used to being out the door at 5 a.m., you're going to have a couple extra hours of beauty rest on race day, which is the exact opposite of 99% of marathoners. So you've got that working in your favor. Kristian, tell us a little bit about how you got into the sport. I mean, there's obviously this huge appetite for hard work, but you also have a pretty cool family history in the sport of running. And I'd love to learn more about when you
That's
first
right.
started getting into the sport, and then maybe we can take that into a little bit more of a discussion about that family history as well.
Yeah, totally. So it's actually interesting because growing up, I never ran. I never ran cross country in high school or elementary school. I never did track at all. Running wasn't really a part of my life. The earliest memory I do have of running was when I was young, living on the Six Nations Reserve. There was a track behind the elementary school I went to, but this track wasn't a running track. It was like a dirt slash gravel track. Horses used to run on it. And anyways, I think it was track and field. There was I think it was like 100-meter race or so that I was a part of against just like other classmates. And I remember just winning that little race. Again, as a little kid, didn't think anything of it. But that was like kind of the first memory I really have of running. But kind of how I got into running was during the COVID pandemic. So growing up, I actually played hockey all my life. And so during COVID, hockey was canceled. I had to have some way to kind of get my exercise in, stay fit. And so I just thought, okay, why don't I just start running? Because
Yeah.
in hockey, one of the things you do is you run to kind of get that off ice training. So I started to run, and immediately it became a game for me. So it was like, okay, you did the 5K. Okay, let's try to do a 10K. That became, okay, a 20K. And it was like, okay, can I run a little bit faster? And I think one special memory I do have of running was one morning I told my dad, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go out for just a 10K run. And I ended up running 30K. And yeah, I had no water with me. It wasn't planned for. It was just kind of one of those things. I was like, 10K, I feel good. 15, 20, I'm still feeling good. The last 10 didn't feel too good, but like I
But you're
told
committed at
myself,
that point.
that's right. I told myself I'm running 30, and I think that moment was a bit of an eye opener for me because like at that time I didn't have proper running shoes, and I had no fluids, and it was like a hot summer day, and I was like, wow, like I was able to mentally, put myself through that and get to the 30K mark. And I wasn't even planning to do that run. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of, potential here in terms of running.
Yeah.
And so, kind of how I found out about my great great grandfather, Tom, was as I got more serious into running, there was a specific pair of shoes that I wanted. And these were the Nike Vaporfly Next Percent 2s,
Yeah.
because that's what all the pros used. And I was like, wait a second, there's an incredible runner in my own family. And I began thinking of the time when I was a youngster and my mom or some other family member mentioned Tom. And I was like, wait, tell me the story again. What was the story? Anyways, they ended up giving me this book called, I think it was like The Man No One Could Run Faster Than.
Yeah.
And it was a book about Tom Longboat. And I read that book and I got really intrigued, and I started to do my own research on Tom. And then right away, running became more than just running. It was something that, I started to take more personal. It was something that kind of connected me to my family roots. And so it was like, okay, this is what I need to do.
Wow. Probably a little bit of added motivation or excitement to think, oh my gosh, my great great grandfather had the talent to win the Boston Marathon. Maybe
Absolutely.
I've got that in me too. And I think you've clearly been working hard to see just how far that talent is going to take you. You've talked about your goal for this race, trying to get as close to your grandfather's time as possible, hopefully with the assistance of Vaporflies over whatever leather
That's
shoes that he
right.
was wearing in 1907. If he were around today, he might think he had a couple more minutes left in his tank. But yeah,
Absolutely.
how important has it been to you to carry that family legacy, the legacy of the Six Nations as well, with you in this training journey towards Boston?
Yeah, you know what? It's something special that I have that not many other runners have. Just, knowing the legacy that Tom had. I always think about it, I'm like, man, this man was so fast considering the conditions he was running, didn't have the Vaporfly shoes, there were no carbon plated shoes. I'm thinking of the roads, they weren't paved and nice and smooth, all the access to, nutrition and recovery and, how to train properly, that wasn't readily available. A lot of it was trial and error back then. So it really is mesmerizing to kind of imagine just how fast he was given those circumstances. And it's just, it's added fuel to the fire. Without his legacy, without having those ties to him, I really don't think I would have continued to run because, like anyone who gets into running, there's always that moment where it sucks in the beginning, right? It's not fun. And you have to be able to kind of push through that to see some results, to be able to enjoy it. And I wouldn't have been able to get to that stage unless it were for, the inspiring story that Tom, left behind and crafted. And so, now it's way bigger than running for me, just knowing that there's so many people on my home reserve that are cheering for me, that are rooting me on. I've had people from Western who are historians. Shout out to Bob Barney, Dan Reed. These were people who have researched Tom Longboat, who have done their thesis on him, and just knowing that they're also looking up to me and they're interested in seeing my progression as a runner and kind of being able to live out the legacy of Tom and just being able to follow his footsteps, with Around the Bay, with the Boston Marathon, being able to keep some of that family lineage alive and just present because it was such a big part of Canadian history. It just feels so special to be able to continue that. And I'll never be as great of a runner as Tom, but it's just super cool and super special just to be able to keep his legacy living and just to inspire other people and make a positive impact in the sport of running.
Yeah, and you're certainly well on your way to doing that already, Kristian. You talk about continuing that legacy. You also talk about how important Tom Longboat was to Canadian history. And it brings me to my next question about just the importance of the Boston Marathon. I mean, even when he won it in 1907, it was already this iconic event for well over a century now. Canadians have made the pilgrimage to Boston to be part of that event. And he was waving the flag not just for himself, but for our whole country when he went. In the current political climate that we find ourselves in, is that on your mind at all about carrying that flag of Canada, of the Six Nations Reserve, of your family to the Boston Marathon and being an ambassador?
Absolutely. It's something, very special and sentimental to me and to, my family members on Six Nations Reserve. I have family from the reserve who are coming down to Boston to kind of support me and cheer me on. So it's something that, I take very wholeheartedly. And it's just super cool just to be a 23-year-old running his first Boston Marathon. When Tom ran, he was also a youngster. I believe he was 22, 23 years old. So it's cool that I'm able to experience this at a young age. And yeah, the goal is just to be able to one day run that 224 marathon and represent Canada, represent, my home reserve and try to put Canada more on the map and just show the uniqueness that it has to offer. There's a saying I like to say. It goes, "My purpose is clear, but my path is unique." And so what I mean by that is my purpose in the sense that I'm laser focused on running. I want to see how far I can take it. I want to just become the best runner that I can possibly become because it is something I am super passionate about. And I want to do this, as almost like a second chapter to Tom's legacy because, as a younger generation, it's just super inspiring for myself to kind of be able to continue the family lineage here. And then what I mean path is unique, what I mean by that is that my running journey, I won't fully be able to replicate Tom's in the way that he did, but hopefully I'll be able to, cover some of the ground that he was able to cover, whether that be through the Boston Marathon or through a Chicago Marathon or whatever races that I enter in the future. I find it really inspiring to myself and others just to be able to kind of craft and find my own journey in running and just be able to touch the lives of other people.
Yeah, it's a pretty special thing that you get to do, to literally run in the footsteps of a grandfather. And I think it's something that any of us would be envious of to have the opportunity to do. And in terms of being an ambassador, you've already done such a wonderful job for yourself, for your reserve, for your family, for your school, and for the country of Canada. Kristian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Very best of luck as you finish up the final steps of your taper for Boston, and you will have us all keenly watching on Marathon Monday as you take to the starting line in Hopkinton and make your way towards Boston. We'll be keeping an eye on that 2:24:24, both in this race and hopefully many future races to come for you, Kristian. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to your audience for all the support that all you guys have shown. And it's been great pleasure chatting with you.
No, the pleasure's been all mine. Best of luck. Thanks, Kristian.
Best of luck. Take care, John.
A huge thank you to all three of our guests, Rory, Paula, and Kristian, for contributing to this special Boston Marathon edition of the Shakeout Podcast. To follow along with each of their journeys, make sure to give them a follow by finding their social media information in our show notes. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Shakeout Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Whether you're a 2025 Boston participant yourself, gleaning some last-minute tips and motivation before towing the line on Patriots Day, or simply a fan of this great sport of ours, thanks so much for tuning in this week. I'm your host, John Gay, saying goodbye, and we'll see you next time for your weekly Shakeout.